Hey, this is John with FixYourDirtBike.com, and this is how to rebuild the top end on your 1997 through 2001 Honda CR250. I wanted to make this as easy to follow as possible, so I've broken the top end service into 15 steps that cover the removal, inspection, and installation of each component in order, followed by the leak down test and break-in. In this video, we're going to cover what specialty tools and supplies you need, along with precautions and shop setup. Besides the basic hand tools I've listed in the individual steps, you will need a few specialty tools. Let's start with DIY tools. You will need to build a piston pin puller and a piston holder. For the pin puller, all you need is a length of all thread, 2 nuts, 1 fender washer, and a large socket. Thread 1 nut onto the all thread, followed by the washer and the socket. Run the all thread through the piston pin and install the nut. Place a shop towel between the socket and the piston, and tighten the socket against the piston. Hold the all thread in place with one hand, and tighten the socket nut with the other to press the pin out of the piston into the socket. For the piston holder, find a short 2x4, drill a 3/4 inch hole in the middle, then cut an opening from one end to the hole. Make sure to sand your holder to remove anything that could potentially fall into the crankcase. The piston pin puller should be no more than $10, and the piston holder should be free. You will be cleaning carbon buildup off the cylinder head, inside the cylinder, and a lot on the exhaust valve components. For the cylinder head, all you will need is a scouring pad, but for the exhaust valve parts, I had to use a wire brush on a drill, followed by a Dremel with a sanding wheel. Your cylinder is most likely Nickel plated, so you will either need a honing brush or a scouring pad and time to safely deglaze it. Considering a honing brush costs $80, I use a scouring pad and I make the time. You cannot use a ball hone on Nickel plating. If, however, your cylinder has been bored and sleeved, you can use a ball hone to quickly deglaze and crosshatch. A ball hone goes for around $40 if you need one. For inspections, you will need a machinist's straightedge, feeler gauges, telescoping bore gauges, and calipers. A machinist's straightedge is simply a really straight edge. A feeler gauge is a bundle of thin strips of metal with varying thicknesses that let you measure small gaps. We will use the straightedge and the feeler gauge together to measure warp limits. Telescoping bore gauges are used to measure interior diameters. Compress the telescoping arms, insert the gauge into the opening you need to measure, find the median measurement, then tighten the screw on the end of the handle to keep the arms in place. Because the ends of the gauge are spring-loaded, all you need to do is wiggle it a few times and it will find the median measurement on its own. One important note about bore gauges is that you need to make sure it is perpendicular to the surface being measured. After you set your gauge, you will need to measure it with calipers. Ideally, you would use a dial micrometer because the bore gauge will seat on each end. Dial micrometers can be very expensive, so I'm using a set of regular calipers. If you use regular calipers, you will need to take your time to position the bore gauge between the caliper arms just right. When you find your measurement, do not let the telescoping arms snap back to position. Hold the arms while you loosen the set screw and let them gently reset. A machinist straightedge starts at $30 and it goes way up. A set of feeler gauges costs around $7, a set of telescoping bore gauges costs around $20, and a set of digital calipers goes for $15. You will need to use a plastic scraper to clean the mating surfaces. This is basically a flat razor, but it's plastic. For the cylinder head, you will need a spark plug thread follower to true the spark plug threads. For the cylinder base nuts, you will need the Motion Pro torque wrench adapter because you can't get anything else on 3 of the 4 nuts. When using the adapter, make sure to keep it at a 90-degree angle to your torque wrench to maintain an accurate measurement. The plastic scraper should cost around $10, the spark plug thread follower should be about $5, and the torque wrench adapter is $13. Aside from basic parts cleaners and shop towels, you will need molybdenum grease and lithium grease for installation. You can find moly grease in the tube at any auto store, but I like to use this Lube moly grease simply because the squeeze tube is super convenient. For assembly lubricant, I like to use Lucas Assembly Lube. It's not critical, but I already have it and I like to use it. But you can get away with 2-stroke oil mixed 1-to-1 with transmission fluid. As a general rule, I never buy parts before I start, unless it's a mandatory replacement like gaskets and O-rings. For example, unless you are dead set on installing an aftermarket piston, hold off on buying one until you get a good look at your old one. If it's undamaged and within spec, you can reuse it with new rings and pin clips. You will, however, need a gasket set, cylinder alignment dowels, and an O-ring for the exhaust valve cap. I am using a Tusk top-end gasket kit that sells for $12, the alignment dowels cost $1.34, and the O-rings cost $2.69. All you need to do is take your time and stuff a shop towel in every hole you open, and your top-end rebuild will go smoothly. Make yourself a clean workspace with plenty of room for tools and supplies. Ideally, a workspace you can use for several days if you can't get everything done at once. I taped a large trash bag to the top of my workbench to protect the wood. During inspection and assembly, I use an old hand towel. This protects the components I am working on, it ensures my workspace is free of contaminants, and if I drop small parts, they won't bounce away. You will also need access to a hot water source. If all you have is a bathtub or a kitchen sink, be ready to clean thoroughly when you're done. It's hard to say how long a full top-end rebuild will take you, but set aside a full day to complete it. This service will cost between $20 and $400, depending on what tools you already have and what parts you need. And if you need parts sent out to be machined or refinished, you could be looking at $1,000 or more. For example, a full cylinder replating can cost upwards of $400. If you have any questions before you start your top-end rebuild, please let me know in the comments or on our Facebook page. One more thing. In this series, I will be referring to measurements in .00 whatever inches because saying thousandth 10 times in a row is hard. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's get started.